The Phoenix Suns ruining Phoenicians' Christmas times everywhere across the valley with a late overtime loss to the Denver Nuggets. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll talk about what went wrong in that game, what it tells us going forward, and where the Suns stack up in the Western Conference after a tough schedule to close the 2022 calendar. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Tuesday. If you're back to work, hopefully this makes it go down a little easier. Some Suns talk to start your day. If you have the rest of the week off, congratulations. You are one of the lucky ones. But either way, Suns basketball is not cooling down, not taking a break, and we've had a lot to talk about over the weekend. 2 very high-profile matchups, so we're going to hit both. We're going to talk about Chris Paul and his play lately and where the Suns stack up in the middle of all of this. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. All right, joining us to talk about all of that is Brendon Dueñas. He is a writer at Bright Side of the Sun. He is a face you will remember. And we have an announcement to make. Brendon is going to be returning to the show once a week. We did that during the Suns finals run, and I think he must have been the lucky charm because he left, and then the Suns had a much worse season. But Brendon, I'm excited to have you back on, man. I'm excited to talk Suns with you more often.
Appreciate it, man. And yeah, I'm happy to be back, and hopefully we can, get the good vibes rolling again. And hopefully I was a good luck charm. We'll find out pretty soon, as they have 9 of their next 11 games are on the road. So it's going to be a tough stretch, probably without Booker. But yeah, I'm super excited to be back on the show. And it's been a while since I've recorded, since me and Dave did that kind of signing off episode. So good to get back on the podcast grind for sure.
Yeah, if you're finding this show because you were a solar panel listener or you're a follower of Brandon's on Twitter, hello, welcome. We are on YouTube, which we were not until the very tail end, I think, of when Brandon was on here last time. So, yeah, we're going to be doing this usually Mondays, but we'll be pinging around. Aaron will still be coming on once a week, but just better to have those consistent voices to talk about this team with rather than just me blathering at you guys all the time. So it should be fun. But like I said, like Brandon just said, we do have a lot to get into. Booker leaves this game a 128 to 125 loss. Booker leaves at about the 4-minute and 20-second mark, but really he injured himself like 30, 40 seconds before that, trying to get around a screen, and you could see him kind of pull up. He really didn't engage at all for the rest of the time that he was in there, and then they're able to get a timeout and get him off the floor, and it ends in overtime. But we're gonna focus in. We're gonna zoom in on Chris Paul, Brandon, because I would say I talked a lot about Shamet when he had the 31-point game the first time. And so he was the big story of the game, but, not really doing anything necessarily out of the ordinary. He's been really good for this whole week, and the Nuggets just kept leaving him open. But Chris Paul kind of had to carry the weight because Book was out, and Mikal Bridges didn't have much of an offensive night, and DeAndre Ayton was doing his normal thing, but not really anything too terribly exciting. So it was Chris Paul taking a lot of these shots late in the game and not making a lot of them. He was 6 of 17 from the field. He was also an uncharacteristic 5 of 10 from the free throw line, which was a bizarre thing to see, but he did have the 16 assists, 0 turnovers. So, vintage Chris Paul in that way, but it's a continuation, Brandon, I think, of what we've seen from the point guard all year. He hasn't really looked very godlike at all. And I think Suns fans are starting to worry, and I kind of think they have reason to worry about how Chris Paul has looked now for almost half the season.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some reason for concern, and Father Time's undefeated, and Chris is also at the same time he's in a role where he's trying to pick up a lot of slack with Booker out, Campaign's out, and that obviously changes the dynamic of the bench, because you saw as soon as CP went to the bench there in the fourth quarter, there was a a stretch where I think the Suns had at least 3 turnovers in a row with like Point Shamet. So just, little things like that where it's like there's just not a lot of room for error. And like you mentioned, the free throws too. He just seemed gassed. And, when you're expecting someone that's near 40 years old to take on that big of a role and fill in for Booker and both the Cams, it's just, it's not really an indictment on him more than it is on James Jones, I think, which we can talk about later. But I think this roster is very incomplete. But as far as Chris Paul is concerned, he's definitely this is probably the worst he's been as a member of the Suns, and it's coming at the worst possible time. So there's definitely some reason for concern. Is he just coasting to its regular season? I don't know. I think he's too competitive to do that personally. So I think there's definitely some reason for Suns fans to worry a little bit here.
Yeah, he's 39.8% from the field this year, 34% from deep, which has actually gone up lately, although he was 0 of 3 against Denver, and then 79.2% from free throw range. So if you drill that down even a little bit more, he's at 44% from 2-point range, and then only 42% from mid-range. So, and 42% from mid-range, that would be like decent for a lot of players. But for him, it's pretty bad. I mean, he was at 55% last season. And for a guy who has made a diet, especially late in his career, out of that being kind of his main offense, you can't have a mid-range shot, which is already tough, which is already, of course, only worth 2 points, which you're not going to get fouled on. For that to only be 42%, you're talking about, in a range where that proves why people in the modern NBA don't take a lot of those, because it starts to be really inefficient unless you're amazing at it. He hasn't been amazing at it. He's tied for the most turnovers per 36 minutes of his career, which for him, that's still not even 3 a game or 3 per 36. So it's not like it's really, really hurting the team. But if you're just looking for kinds of sign of these slipping areas, I think that's definitely one. And then you go through the recent games where Booker hasn't played, and I mean, good, bad, or whatever, it's been on him to have to create offense. I agree with you. I think we all agree that James Jones hasn't done an amazing job of this, but at the same time, the facts are the facts. He's needed to do it. He hasn't been able to. He was 2 of 5 from the field with 7 assists across the fourth quarter and overtime last night against Denver. He was 0 of 2 from the field with 4 assists in the fourth quarter against Washington earlier this week. And then if you go back all the way to the second of that doubleheader against New Orleans, the one Book did not play in, where Chris got ejected or you fouled out or whatever, and then they lost in overtime, he was 1 of 3 from the field with just 3 assists across all of the fourth quarter and the little bit of overtime that he played. So the assists are what you want to see, but, talking about a number one shot creator on what wants to be a championship caliber team, not even going 50% from the field, not even getting up many shots most of these nights in these crunch moments. That's not what we had come to expect. We came to expect that if anything, Paul was at least going to be able to get it going in those late crunch time, clutch time moments. You saw it against the Nuggets in some of those situations. He took, I would say, some of the shots that you wanted him to take against the Nuggets, which was at least good to see. They didn't go in. So yeah, it's one of those things, Brandon. I feel like it's hard to kind of come down on one side or the other because we're not in his head. But I tend to agree with you. Like, I don't think he's the type of player that's going to intentionally not give something his all. He might adjust his style. He might do things differently, which we've seen. But I don't feel like he's just not playing 100% because he wants to slow it down. If that is going to be the result of, if that's going to result in a loss, I have a hard time thinking Chris Paul would ever do that. So it makes me worried.
No, 100%. And you brought up all the stats that kind of back up the eye test too, because like you just look at his separation. It's just, there's the lack of it compared to like previous years where he can always get to his spot and he still does, but there's just not as much separation anymore. And you'll see defenders close out and he'll kind of, do that thing where he goes up, it looks like he's going to shoot, and then he just kind of dumps it off and, tries to get a bailout pass in the corner. He's done that quite a bit this season. And I think that's just because he's not getting that separation. And, people in the scouting reports always know what he's going to do. And in previous years, it didn't matter. Now he's just not getting there as quickly. So I think that's another thing where he can get to his spots, but when he does, the closeouts are pretty much immediately on him sometimes. So I think that's just the lack of burst and lack of explosiveness that comes with aging. So It's unfortunate, and hopefully he gets a little more pep in his step as the season goes on. In some bigger games, I think we'll see moments like that, but on a consistent basis at that age, you're just not going to, against the best athletes in the world, you're not going to be able to create that same type of separation you could in your glory days.
I mean, he was trying to get those. You could tell they wanted to get Chris Paul on an island against Michael Porter Jr., right? They were setting up that screen over and over in this Nuggets game. And then it's like, okay, but for what? Like, Chris Paul wasn't scoring in those spots. He was obviously, like you just said, kind of worried about the contest from MPJ, which if he's anything, he's 7 feet tall, basically, right? Like, that's kind of the one useful physical feature that MPJ has as a defender, is he's just really big. And then Chris Paul's kind of bailing himself out of those moments. So you can see that they don't have a lot of answers if he's not able to score, which, I mean, yeah, if you're telling any NBA team that their 2 best scorers from a season ago are either going to be out or severely hampered, yeah, they're all going to take a step back. But if you had to bet, do you think come playoff time that there's still hope that Chris Paul can be the 14 of 14 against the Pelicans guy, or the 41 points against the Clippers in round 3 in 2021? Do you feel like we should expect those heights to be possible for him anymore, or do the coaching staff and Suns fans kind of need to adjust to, like, we are seeing a very different version of Chris Paul this year?
I think that's very dependent on what moves they make at the trade deadline. Because I think given the roster construction, if he's in a role where he's not having to do as much and they have legitimate threats that defenses have to be worried about, and he kind of has a little less pressure on himself and isn't tiring himself out trying to carry the workload, I think we could definitely see, moments like that where he hits, his peak. But on a consistent basis, like I said, at that age, it's just not realistic to rely on someone like that consistently. So that's kind of like a cop-out answer that, yes, I think he can occasionally do it, but it's not, like I said, it really comes down to this team has a couple of holes they have to fill in the roster and build around CP and Book better. And Mikal, to a lesser extent, too, has gotten some blame for trying to fill in for basically 3 spots right now. And it's just not realistic. So, but yeah, overall, I think Chris, we will see more point guard performances. It's just not going to be as frequent.
Well, and we saw it early in the season, right? I mean, even against the Warriors the Mavericks on opening night when Campaign closes that game. But even aside from who closed, you could see, like, Chris Paul didn't even have the ball when he was in there all the time. And that was when the team was fully healthy. Obviously, Jay Crowder was still not there. They didn't have a player in place of him, which they still don't. But that even started to feel like, okay, like, this is a way of bringing Chris Paul along more slowly. Now he's so far above that in terms of what he's being asked to do. So it's not ideal circumstances for anybody, but I do think we're on the same page that you can't ignore it anymore. You can't pretend like it's not there. You just have to monitor it. And I think it will affect what James Jones does at the trade deadline. But let's get into where that leaves this team. What we saw on Friday night, getting manhandled by the Grizzlies, and then, Christmas night, very narrow loss to the Nuggets. You mentioned the schedule right now, and going forward is going to really continue to test them. Where does that leave them? Where are they in the scheme of the Western Conference? We'll get into that next. First, today's show brought to you again by Prize Picks. Look, Prize Picks, they fixed fantasy games, in my opinion. We've all done daily pools. We've all done leagues, year-long leagues, whatever it might be. It's a pain. It's a pain when you don't have the answers, when you're not on top of it every day, when you don't pay attention. You just want to do something fun. You just want to make a few bucks. You want to engage with your favorite sports, but you don't know as much as the guy who maybe does it for a living, or the people in your league who bully you around every year. But Prize Picks fixed that. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will score more or less than their Prize Picks player projection, and you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. Again, not competing against other people. It's just you versus those Prize Picks projections. They offer projections on any sport you watch, whether that's pro basketball, college basketball, even esports, disc golf, cricket. Yes, they really have it for everything. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy, and they offer safe and fast withdrawals for your winnings. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play this awesome daily fantasy sports game. First-time users, again, can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On, meaning if you deposit $100, Prize Picks puts $100 right back in your account for you. If you deposit 50, Prize Picks gives you 50 back. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, so let's go. Just go through the West, Brandon, because a lot of teams are injured right now. We haven't really seen anybody's best versus anybody's best all that consistently, but it is what it is. That's the NBA this year. A lot of neck and neck standings results. What I want to do, though, is we're factoring in all of the options going forward. So, if we're ranking the Suns, it's not just like, what do the Suns look like on Sunday night on Christmas against the Nuggets? It's like, what do the Suns look like with the understanding of, okay, maybe they add Kyle Kuzma. What is that? Like, that's kind of where I am talking about Chris Paul and what his future could look like. So we're kind of doing it as a projection of game one of the first round. Who do you like as far as championship upside? That's kind of how I'm envisioning this. And it's going to be a little bit of a power ranking. I couldn't even frankly get to 8 teams that I feel great about. I got to like 6, and then I had a bottom tier with a couple teams that I really don't think are going to be in the mix. But I have the Nuggets at number 1, whether it's what we saw from them on Christmas, the way they've been playing lately. I think they've won 4 or 5 in a row. They really, really handed it to the Grizzlies earlier in the week. They've just looked awesome since they got everybody back. And I know their defense is not very good, but they just feel like the most complete, in-control team that I've seen in the West. So I had them at number 1. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Pelicans because I'm factoring in Brandon Ingram still. I know they kind of struggled a little bit, came back down to earth after that hot start and kind of bullying the Suns in those back-to-back games. But I still think just the pure talent with Zion and Ingram and all the role players they have and just the energy, that's just a tough matchup. But like you said, the West is just a giant clump to me. Like, legitimately, a lot of these teams could go any direction, especially with injuries and matchups. Like, there's a lot of leeway. So they're written in pencil at number 1 for me.
I had the Pelicans actually below the Suns in a second tier. And the reason that I say that, I was really high on the coming into the year about New Orleans. Obviously, like you just said, we've seen them, Suns fans have seen them 3 times lately. They've been up and down. They don't have Ingram. It's a weird thing. I believe it's a toe injury with him, which, I mean, he's a big guy and, obviously you don't want to mess with foot stuff for too long and it can spread and whatnot, but that's puzzling to me that's lasted as long as it has. He's always been a guy that has struggled to stay on the floor, but either way, they've been good without him. I just worry about the defense. I mean, he's not always been a big defensive difference maker. I think he will help. Their role players are good. I just wonder if you're playing, Zion for 40 minutes a game in the playoffs. You have Valanciunas, who's fine, but he's not really out there to be a defender so much. And then your backup plan is sort of Larry Nance at center, and you're very small then. I just want to see what answers they try to come up with defensively before I put them at the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
But again, the West is very mixed. So to round out my top tier, I had three teams in each tier, and I had 3 tiers. So the other 2, aside from Denver, at the top for me were Golden State, who I still have there. Steph has been out. They've had a weird season. Their bench and role players are not great. I think that they'll make a trade to get somebody. I don't know if that's quite enough, but I still just feel like, their starters, their 5 guys. I trust that in a weird year with a lot of parity. I'm going to just default there. And then the Grizzlies at number 3. I don't fully feel like they have an incredibly well-rounded team yet. They're very young. It would surprise me with their current rotation to see that team with so many young guys contributing win a championship. That would be pretty unprecedented, but they've proven it for 2 regular seasons now. So it's kind of hard for me to leave them out. I think Ja has earned that respect as well, but I don't have the Suns there. So do you have the Suns in your top 3 and your top tier, whatever you kind of have it as?
Yeah. So I have 5 teams in my top tier and the Suns are one of them. They're closer to the bottom with the Warriors, I'd say right now, just because come playoff time, at full strength, I think both these teams, at the end of the day, they're teams you don't want to face in a playoff series. And especially if the Suns go and add a Kyle Kuzma, like you mentioned, or make those upgrades. I think they're definitely in the mix, but that's obviously projecting a little bit. I have the Denver Nuggets right behind the Pelicans. I think I have some similar questions about their defense as you do the Pelicans. I think defensively, like they're fine, but their system in certain matchups, I think, could be exposed pretty easily. Like, I mean, we just saw Landry Shamet and Damian Lee, carve them up. And, so that's, I don't know. I still have some concerns about that defense. Despite how great Jokic is, there's still some concerns there. And then have the Grizzlies as well in that top tier. So pretty much 1 through 5, I really think any of those teams, if they get the right matchup or get hot at the right time, could win it. Like we saw the Celtics last year were like 16 and 19 around New Year's. And I was actually at the Suns game on New Year's Day when the Suns were, doing pretty well and the Celtics were not. And Celtics fans were, I'll never forget. They're just like, I'm so jealous of your guys' situation. Just like, they're super nice for whatever reason. And I was just like, man, the tables have turned pretty quick.
They have. And it feels like it's going to be a season like that. And I think, if you're projecting forward, there's been this debate about buyers versus sellers at the trade deadline, as there always is. And there's not a lot of sellers. And part of that's because teams like Utah and whatnot that we kind of thought might be down there, they've stayed afloat. So maybe there's no need to tear it down, whatever. But I feel like it might not fully be a ton of sellers. It might not be the best market we've ever seen, but I think there's going to be so much of an impetus to get into an arms race like that maybe there's only a handful of difference-making players that become available. But I think we might actually see teams overpay for it, because I think you're in a year where if you're the Suns, if you're the Pelicans, if you're the Warriors, all these teams, Grizzlies, who I think are in place to make a trade, maybe that's the difference between you getting there and not getting there. And so you give up a first-round pick. You give up 2 first-round picks. You give up that young player that you weren't, wanting to part ways with, maybe, mostly with Memphis probably falling in that category. So I factor that in a lot, but I also don't know who that team is going to be. So my second tier is the Pelicans, who we've talked about. They're at number 6, so I'll jump back up. Number 4 is the Clippers. I still just trust their upside. The fact that they're one of the only teams outside of the Warriors who have players who have gotten to, the finish line or gotten very close in their careers before, who have lots and lots of playoff experience. Kawhi looked pretty darn good in a game against the Sixers right before the Christmas break. So I don't love that. It feels like they still have too many players. Ty Lue doesn't really run a lot of offense, whatever. They have some things to figure out, like all of these teams do, but I value that experience. So yeah, 4 Clippers, 5 Suns, 6 Pelicans is my second tier. Who's the team that I have in my top 6 who you didn't have? Because you said your top tier was 5. Was it the Clippers who you had outside of that?
Clippers are just below that. And and I still believe in them. That's the thing. Like I would put money that one of those 6 teams will come out of the West. And I don't think anyone outside of that 6 has a realistic chance as things stand right now. I think those are the 6 teams. It really just comes down to health. And I just don't know if the Clippers are full strength. I would definitely have them in that top tier. But I think that's such a huge if at this point that we don't even really know what that looks like either. So I think there's still a lot of questions with them, but they are definitely a tough team, and I think still in that top tier and have to be taken seriously. But I think those top 6 teams in the West right now, well, I guess top 5 in the standings plus the Warriors, those are the teams I think that are legitimate contenders, and really it wouldn't shock me if any one of those 6 teams made it to the finals.
Yeah, don't disagree at all. It feels like as clustered as it is, I don't think anyone's going to break into that top group, but still 6 teams is quite a few. Golden State is down at 11th in the standings, like you just mentioned. So whenever Steph finally gets back, they're going to have a lot of ground to make up just to get into comfortable position. They're probably going to want to at least get to 9 so that they're not fighting for their lives on the road in those play-in games. And so they're going to have a really tough path just to get there. And then we'll see who kind of gets home court advantage and all that in the West. But that leaves us with the Suns. I mean, that's kind of where we both have them. I mean, you had them a little bit higher than me, but this is the first year in a while that they're not kind of firmly in, the 1-2 slot in their conference. That's 2 straight years where heading into the playoffs, we're not there yet. Maybe we'll feel better about them by the end of the season. But last year they were firmly number 1 the whole way. And even in the year before, we had some questions because it was Chris Paul's first season, but by the end of the year, they're number 2 in the West, and it would be kind of crazy to doubt them. that they had what it was going to take. And so we'll see what they can do to add to this roster, get healthy, start to coalesce. Cam Johnson looks like he'll be back soon. I think that's been an underestimated missing piece, but I think we're being realistic here. And I think, like you said at the beginning, it gives James Jones a lot to work on. But let's close things out. Let's talk about Memphis, who we just talked about generally a little bit, but the Suns will play them again tonight as you guys are listening to this. So what can the Suns do to avoid a very bad outcome like we saw on December 23rd in Footprint Center? We'll get into that next. First, today's show is also brought to you by BetOnline. With more odds, props, and lines than ever before, BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting info all year long. They have pro basketball. They have, let's see if they have a line for this Suns Grizzlies game, but they have esports, NASCAR. Just like the last sponsor, you can get just about any odds that you need. They also have football odds for next weekend already. Thursday night football, the Tennessee Titans are 10-point underdogs because their quarterback is out and injured and looks awful. The Arizona Cardinals are 4-point underdogs on the road in Atlanta. I don't expect any of you to watch that, but maybe you can put some money down and enjoy the game a little bit more that way. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. Again, the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close things out, Brandon, with some quick thoughts on this Grizzlies matchup. So I went to the game on last Friday because I was kind of excited to see Ja, thought it might be a pretty good game, and it did not ultimately turn out to be that. The Suns were down 19 after the first quarter, and Monty Williams came out post-game and really criticized the team and kind of said, I think he said that he feels like they're the prey right now, and he doesn't like that feeling, and that if the Suns don't get back to playing with the level of force that they know they need to, that it's not going to be the type of season they want. So did you feel like we saw more fight and more force on Christmas against the Nuggets? Do you think that we'll at least see a more competitive, matching energy type of game from this Phoenix squad, even if Booker doesn't play?
Yeah, I think the game yesterday, unfortunate how it ended and everything, but I thought the Suns really were impressive. Booker went out, they're down pretty big early. It looked like it was just going to be another one of those disasters unfolding right before our eyes. And like they could have easily folded, but they fought back and they really battled. And I'm not a huge moral victory guy, but I thought given the circumstances, they played about as well as you could have asked them to. Obviously there's some late game hiccups and, turnovers and dumb decisions that cost them the game. But I thought they played hard. And I think this is going to be more of a test though, just against a Grizzlies team that just, got their asses handed to them by the Warriors. They're going to be motivated to come back from that. And, they're 13-2 at home. The Suns are struggling on the road this year. So no Booker. I think this one, honestly, I don't like how it looks for the Suns. But if they can show that same fight and same battle and compete in this one and give themselves a chance to win, that's really all you can ask for. But yeah, hopefully it won't be a blowout like that last Memphis game, but I think the odds are definitely against them right now.
I think the key is going to be offensive rebounding for the Grizzlies, or just rebounding in general. This was a game where the Grizzlies on Friday had 19 offensive rebounds. Clark and Adams had 12 of those. If you can just be more consistently competitive on the glass, I feel like that already gets you a lot closer if you're the Suns. 3-point shooting, Memphis that's always going to be a weakness of theirs. They really don't shoot the ball, at an elite level by any means. So, we saw the Suns get hot on Christmas. I do think with Lee and Shamet playing a lot of minutes, if you can just get those guys open shots, you're going to get games going in your favor a little bit more. That's just how the NBA works these days. Games are not really blowouts as often because of the shooting. And so if the Suns can do that, I think you're looking at a more competitive game. But it is going to be hard. I mean, it's going to be difficult without Booker. I thought going in, if Booker was going to play on Friday, which obviously he didn't, but I was like, okay, this team actually for Memphis is a little bit worse off against Booker than they used to be. If people remember, that always used to be a really tough matchup for Book and when the Suns played the Grizzlies, because They had Dylan Brooks as the primary matchup, but then they would always have like a DeAnthony Melton or someone else to kind of slide in there so that basically for 48 minutes, Booker was kept in check. Now, without him, Brooks can guard Chris Paul. Brooks can guard Mikal Bridges. You can put, I think they had like Ja on Chris quite a bit. They had Tyus Jones on Chris. He's just not that worrisome. And so the defensive job for Memphis is just that much easier. It was already hard for me to come up with a situation where the Suns scored more than like 100 points. And I think you're really just going to have to rely on, don't let Memphis score 120 again. And then maybe you get a little bit more luck on the 3-point side of things and you can get up to 105, 110 maybe, and then win the game that way. But this Memphis defense, they're the best in the NBA in the month of December, and the Suns don't have a lot to do to change that. So yeah, it's not great, but you should at least be able to put up a more competitive performance and have some respect about this matchup so that they don't feel like they own you, which it feels like based on what Ja's been saying publicly, he's not too worried about Phoenix right now.
Yeah, no, the Grizzlies are slowly, seems like overtaking the Suns is the most, quote worthy / hated on NBA Twitter right now. So I'm here for it, but I love the confidence.
Somebody else take it. Yeah.
Yeah. Go for it. But still a long ways to go on that because, the Suns still pissed off a lot of people. So, right now every team that plays the Suns wants to prove something. There's a reason for that. The last 2 seasons, the Suns have had the most wins in the NBA and, sent some teams home in the West. So the Grizzlies obviously haven't matched up with the Suns, but like you said, it's a tough matchup. Their defense has really turned it up lately. So don't feel great about this one, but we'll see. Hopefully Landry Shamet is still alive after that dunk and can continue his hot shooting.
I was trying not to bring it up. I didn't want to make people's Tuesday after Christmas too bad. You had to just ruin the vibes.
Yeah, I can't not talk about that. I mean, that dunk was just unreal. I mean,
hey, and Landry did it like the respectable thing. Like, I don't blame anybody who tries to get in there. I don't feel like there's if you get close enough where there's actually like a legitimate block charge kind of debate, and they obviously reviewed it, which was kind of BS too, but like, as long as I feel like the worst poster is when you actually try to like block the dunk and the guy just goes over your outstretched hands. But it's like Landry Shamet's 6'5". He did what you're supposed to do. I don't feel like he should feel too embarrassed about that. Aaron Gordon's just a freak. Like, that's all.
No, for sure. Props to him for even trying that. That was risky. And it was,
he got his head landed on also, which was a little dangerous at the end there.
Yeah. And, I think he's slowly winning some Suns fans over with these recent performances. So shout out to Landry. Him and Lee were great yesterday. So try to end it on a positive note there.
You did it. We circled back to some positivity. Happy Tuesday, everybody. We'll be back after this Grizzlies game with my thoughts on what hopefully is more competitive. I'm not going to rule out a win. The Suns have it in them. We all know that. So we'll see. Game tomorrow as well. And then we'll close out the week, hopefully, with Aaron Edwards on Friday. So hit subscribe or follow wherever you're finding the show, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We're there. We're here every day. Get the show. I'll talk to you tonight. In the meantime, go make Locked On Sports Today your second listen to get caught up on everything else going on around the whole world of sports.